They called her Isidora. She arrived at the gates of Calvera in the spring of 1631, dressed in a velvet cloak, the color of dried blood. Her face obscured beneath a veil of ash-gray lace. She did not speak of where she came from, nor why she traveled alone through bandit country and bitter mountains. She simply presented the signet of an extinct noble house Alvarexand, asked for a room facing the eastern sun. The townsfolk whispered, as they always did. Of course, they whispered. Calvera was a stone city carved into the cliffside, where the cold kept everyone's skin pale and their minds alert. A new face, especially one like hers, was bound to raise eyebrows. Not for her beauty, though she had that in unsettling measure. No, it was her stillness, her silence, her strange tendency to gaze just a second too long into people's eyes, as if peeling back a layer of memory they didn't know was still there. Madame Reyes, who ran the boarding house where Isidora stayed, said the woman never aged a day. That was not unusual for a month, nor even a year, but after a decade had passed, and Madame Reyes herself had grown stooped and gray, while Isidora remained precisely as she had been, skin, untouched hair, unthinned lips. As crimson as pressed rose petals, it began to curdle something in the hearts of the townsfolk. That curdling had a name: fear. There were rumors first spoken in drunken hushes at the tavern. That Isidora lit candles made of animal fat with no match, that her cat had no shadow, that children touched by her grew fevers they could not explain. Most damning, perhaps, was the tale told by the apothecary's son that he'd once seen her clipping her fingernails, and that when one of them struck the floor, it sizzled like hot coal in snow. He swore this even as his father beat him for lies. He swore it even on his deathbed 2 weeks later, from a wasting illness that no leech or salve could halt. By 1649, the town was no longer whispering. They were staring, plotting, praying. But Isidora simply continued her daily walks by the cathedral ruins at dawn, collecting wild rosemary in her gloved hands, humming lullabies that no one recognized, but everyone felt they'd heard in dreams. She never visited church. She never grew older. She never explained herself. And when the Inquisitor finally arrived, draped in gold-threaded black, with a retinue of sword-bearers and incense thick as plague smoke, the people of Calvera said nothing. They opened their doors, offered bread, and they watched with eyes as cold as their city walls as Isidora was dragged from her room, her velvet cloak torn, her hands bound behind her with cords soaked in holy water. She did not scream, she did not resist. Only as they pulled her past the old well at the city square did she whisper one sentence. And no one, not the butcher's wife, not the weeping milkmaid, not even the Inquisitor could understand the language it was spoken in. But everyone remembered how the well water turned black the moment she passed. In the records kept by Father Orlan, the execution was described as unremarkable, though with slight difficulty and her body, he wrote, took long to burn. Too long. The flame licked her skin as though reluctant. But that was not the end. Not quite, because after the fire, when the ashes were gathered, something was left. Something that did not burn. 10 slivers, the size of fingernail clippings, each of them black, smooth, and warm to the touch. Possibly warm. The priest who found them collapsed moments later, eyes rolled back, muttering the same lullaby Isidora used to hum in the gardens. He never spoke again. The clippings were sealed in a reliquary, buried deep beneath the chapel floor. But one was stolen. That, my friend, is where our true story begins. The reliquary had no key. It was sealed with 7 nails, each forged in the name of a different saint, and buried beneath the floor of St. Edwin's Chapel in a hollow no deeper than a man's chest, but guarded by 1,000 prayers, so it was written. But paper prayers rot faster than bones, and the years are gluttonous. By the time Brother Aldrich arrived at the chapel as a boy novice in 1704, St. Edwin's was little more than a crumbling silhouette at the cliff's edge. The stained glass was long shattered by storms. Moss curled around every window frame like green rot. The bell had not rung in 50 years. Aldrich was not a man of vision. He had no thirst for greatness, no fire for reform. He came to Calvera to escape, not to discover. But fate does not thirst for vision. It drinks from accidents. It began with a stone, loose, beneath the altar. Aldrich, sweeping dust one autumn morning, nudged it with his broom, and saw the floor beneath give slightly. Something glinted, there a hinge perhaps. Curiosity, like an old fox, stirred in his belly. He waited until nightfall, then returned with a lantern and a rusted chisel. He should not have opened it. The box beneath was carved of ironwood, old as thunder, untouched by decay. On its lid a sigil, not of Christ, not of any saint, but of a single hand, fingers spread, each fingertip engraved with an eye. Inside, nestled like seeds in a dying pod, were 9 curved slivers, smooth, cold, but as his fingers drew near, warmth pulsed up his wrist, like a heartbeat not his own. He touched one, and everything changed. In the days that followed, Aldrich ceased sleeping. It's not from fear, but from a strange clarity that swam behind his eyes like silver fish. He began to remember things, memories that were not his. Cobblestone streets from centuries past, the smell of burning myrrh in catacombs lit with blue fire. A lullaby hummed through a woman's throat, low and mournful, echoing in a language with no name. Then came the visions. He saw her, Isadora, walking barefoot through snow that did not melt. Her eyes were the color of stormy water, her fingers long and curved as calligraphy. She stood before a man with a crown of vines, offering him her hands. He kissed her fingertips. She smiled. When Aldrich awoke, his fingertips were blackened, not with soot, but with a substance that shimmered like glass and oil. He wore gloves from that day on. What the monks saw was a brother growing sickly, reclusive, often lost in trance. What they did not see was the journal. In it, Aldrich began to write symbols curved and spined, never taught by any seminary. He did not know what they meant. He only knew his fingers moved of their own accord, drawing pages upon pages of patterns that resembled vines, eyes, and sometimes the curl of a woman's nail. He traced them in candle wax. He whispered to the box on the floor. And then, on the 7th week, the 10th clipping came home. He did not know who brought it. Only that he woke one night to find it lying on the edge of his cot, next to his journal, wet, breathing. When the reliquary closed again with all 10 slivers in place, the chapel trembled. Somewhere in the catacombs, stones cracked open. Isadora began to speak, not aloud, not in any voice one could hear, but in that deep marrow-level frequency reserved only for saints and madmen. She spoke to Aldrich through the blood in his gums, through the aching of his fingernails as they grew each night, thick and dark as obsidian. She showed him the truth. She had not been born. She had been carved, not by man, nor by God, but by time itself. Not the clockwork time of mortals, but the old time primordial, slow as glaciers, cruel as still water, its keeper, its needle. And in her nails, those 10 cursed blades, she had etched its memories, stolen from the river of days like fish caught on a silent hook. Each clipping held a century of pain, of desire, faces that forgot they ever lived. She could never die while they remained whole, but they could be stolen. And so she aged once. Only once. When they cut her hair in 1630, it did not grow back. When they cracked her nails and buried them, her skin began to pale. And when the 9th clipping was sealed, she felt hunger for the first time in 100 years. But when Aldrich returned, the last one, her time returned to her, and something else came with it. Brother Aldrich was no longer Brother Aldrich. He still called him so, of course, among the 5 remaining monks of St. Edrins, and the dwindling parishioners who came only for last rites. But he was now something far more porous, more hollow, more fueled. The day after the reliquary sealed itself, his voice began to shift. He spoke in sentences he did not compose. At night, his hands twitched in his sleep, performing rituals his waking mind did not comprehend. And when he cut his nails, now glossy, curved, near black, he did not discard the trimmings. He fed them to the chapel flame, and the flame turned blue. They called it illness, spiritual decay, demonic influence. The abbot begged him to fast, to scourge himself. But Aldrich no longer heard them. He was listening to something older, slower. A choir of breathless voices murmuring in stone. He did not know when the dreams became instructions, when her memories became his own. He remembered a forest that no longer existed, where blood dripped from the leaves like dew. He remembered a palace beneath a lake, where no light reached, and time pooled like thick syrup. And most vividly, he remembered a mirror, one that reflected not faces, but futures. It cracked when Isadora looked into it. She smiled as it shattered. Aldrich was that mirror now. It was cracking. When the first death occurred, it seemed natural. Yaba told, tired, slumped mid-prayer, fingers curled around the rosary. The second came a week later. A pilgrim from Brayvale, found stiff in the pews, eyes open so wide they bled. The third was a boy who served incense. He simply vanished, though they found his fingernails in a perfect circle on the chapel floor. Calvera began to whisper again, but this time the name was not Isadora. It was Aldrich. And in his cell, the brother-turned-vessel scribbled her name over and over into the stone walls, not with ink, not with chalk, but with the very edge of his fingernails. Isadora, 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 each letter deeper, darker, more jagged. And behind the walls, something moved. She was not rising. No, Isadora did not need to rise. She unfolded. Like a scroll soaked in oil, like a moth pressing its wings against the confines of flesh. And Aldrich faithful, fragile Aldrich was the cocoon. On the 39th day, his skin split, not in blood, not in agony, but like bark shedding from a tree, clean, deliberate, silent. Beneath, the skin was porcelain pale, veined with silver, his pupils elongated, his spine curved. His voice, when next he spoke, echoed like bells in reverse. He walked into the town square at dusk. People stopped, stared. He held up his hands, 10 fingers, nails now long and glinting like obsidian sickles, and spoke one word, remember, and they did, not just him, not just Isadora. They remembered lifetimes they never lived, lovers they never kissed, deaths they never died. The weight of centuries poured into their minds like hot wax, and screams burst from mouths that didn't know why they screamed. Mothers dropped their children. Priests wept without knowing which god they mourned. It only lasted minutes. But in that time, Calvera remembered her, not as myth, not as whisper, as truth, as queen, as sacrifice. And the world bent. Old walls cracked where her feet once passed. Birds fell mid-flight as their eyes turned black. A cat gave birth to a child-shaped thing with wet fingernails. Only one man resisted. His name was Tomas Rule, a hunter, a skeptic, a man of blades, not books. He did not remember Isadora. His mind was empty of borrowed memory, perhaps because he had no past to anchor. He had come to Calvera to run from debts, from war, from a daughter who no longer called him father. When the madness swept the town, he watched from a rooftop. When Aldrich's skin peeled, and Isadora's voice rose from the broken throat, he did not flinch. And when the chapel bell rang for the first time in 50 years, and its OHE gripped his knife, Tomas did not believe in curses, but he believed in endings. And something told him this thing in the chapel had not yet ended. It had only just begun. Tomas Rule was a man who believed in bone, not breath, in steel, not spirit. He had no prayers left, only scars. But as he stepped into the hollow of St. Edryn's chapel, his boots crunching over ash and fallen plaster, even he felt it, that pressure behind the eyes. That eerie silence, not of absence, but of watching. Aldrich, one could still call him, that stood at the altar, his back arched in reverence or agony. Tomas could not tell. The air shimmered around him like heat rising off meat left too long in the sun. His hands, those terrible black-nailed hands, rested on the reliquary, now cracked open like a ribcage. 10 nails glowed within, breathing. She was there, not fully formed, not of flesh, but a presence, dense, humming, perfumed, with something not floral but funereal. Isadora had returned, but not in the shape they remembered. She was now a rhythm, a hunger, a memory given skin. Did they send you? Aldrich's voice was hers, noused, lilting, layered with 1,000 echoes like wind through catacombs. To finish. What fire could not? Tomas didn't answer. He wasn't here to argue theology. Hurled the knife. It flew clean, straight, kissed the edge of Aldrich's collarbone, and bounced off like it struck marble. A slow smile spread across his face. Isadora laughed. not cruelly, not madly, but with pity. "You still think this is a matter of steel?" She raised one finger. A single nail curved, shimmering, pointed toward Tomas. And suddenly he was elsewhere. A courtyard. No, the courtyard. Calvera, centuries ago. The execution square. The gallows raised, the fire lit. He saw himself not as himself, but another man, a judge. Younger, colder. He held the sentence. He gave the nod. Isadora burned, and he turned away. He had been there. He had killed her. "No," Tomas whispered, staggering backward. "No, that wasn't." "It was," she said gently. "The nails remember. They keep the weight, the pain. That is their purpose, to hold memory, to pin it in place. That is why I never aged, Tomas. I never forgot." The nails had never been a curse. They were a prison, each one containing a century she could not relive. Fragment of soul, clipped and sealed away, leaving her outside the river of time. Untouched, unaged, unwool. But now they had returned, and with them came all her years, all her grief. Aldrich's body began to collapse under the weight. Veins burst like ink bleeding through cloth. His mouth opened in a scream, but only song came out. That lullaby, ancient and wordless, rose like incense, thick and unbearable. The chapel shook, reliquary burst, and 10 nails flew into the air, turning as if alive, then buried themselves into Isadora's palms, one by one. She screamed. This time it was human. The scream shattered the stained glass. The floor buckled, and Tomas bleeding from ears, eyes. Memories crawled toward the altar. Isadora fell. Not dead, but whole. Truly whole. For the first time in 5 centuries, her body was mortal. She coughed, shivered, aged. In minutes, decades raced across her skin like cracks on frozen rivers. Her hair whitened, her spine bent, her eyes dulled. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not for pain, but for peace. Tomas reached her. She looked up. "I remember you," she whispered, not in anger, but with the sadness of someone meeting the ghost of a friend. "You were kind. You looked away before the fire touched me." He nodded, choking. "What do I do?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Bury them." He understood. With shaking hands, he pried each nail from her palms, now no longer slick obsidian, but dull keratin, lifeless. He wrapped them in the remnants of her cloak, now aged to dust, and took them to the deepest crypt beneath the chapel. There, among the nameless tombs, he found a place no memory dared live, a hollow where time did not echo. He buried them one by one, not with prayers, but with silence. When he returned, Isadora was gone, not vanished, just finished. Only Aldrich's body remained, empty, pale, at peace. No one in Calvera remembered what happened. The deaths, the voices, the tremors, it all became fog in their minds, a dream dissolved in waking light. Only Tomas remembered, because he alone had touched the nails. He left Calvera soon after. He never married, never spoke of that night. But in his final years, when the frost claimed his fingers and sleep came slower each night, he began to hear a tune, a lullaby, not from outside, but from beneath his nails.